Chickens here, taking a look today at the double legendaries for my tank characters. As you can see here on my character screen, I'm playing Prot Warrior, Brewmaster Monk, Blood Decay, and Guardian Druid. This expansion, I do not have a Vengeance Demon Hunter or a Prot Paladin. I'm not one of those six tank guys, right? Four is good enough for me. So if you're looking for commentary on Prot Paladin or Vengeance Demon Hunter, this will not be the video. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the Prot Warrior first, and obviously we can't discuss the double legendaries without looking at the tier set bonuses as well. Prot Warrior is actually a pretty good place to start because the um, tier sets themselves are varying in the way that they impact the double legendary selections. Prot Warrior being the most flexible, in my opinion. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Pull it up on the screen. So the way this outburst thing is going to work is you're basically going to spend a bunch of rage. It's going to give you these outburst stacks, and then you're going to Shield Slam, Thunderclap, or Ignore Pain to make those spells more effective, right? Or the spell. And then in addition to that, Avatar increases your damage dealt by an additional 10%, decreases damage taken by 10%, and your Avatar will give you 8 stacks of this outburst. I've heard several different opinions. I think Dorky released a video today about it. He didn't say this was the worst one. I think everyone pretty much unanimously agrees which one the worst one is, but he said this isn't in the top half. I would tend to agree. And the reason that I agree is because 8 stacks at 30 rage of pop is 240 rage. Spending 240 rage to get 200% increased damage to a Thunderclap, that does seem low. So the 2 set in itself, I don't necessarily feel good about. And since Avatar is a 1.5 minute cooldown, of course, reduced in part thanks to the talent called Anger Management here at the bottom. It's roughly like a minute and 10. So that does alleviate that to an extent, but I do think this is a bit of a lackluster tier set in general. So in terms of the actual impact, though, that the tier set has on our double legendary discussion, it's very minimal, right? Let's go ahead and take a look at those double legendaries. The double legendary options available to us. So since I've just been playing this as a rat alt, I've just been playing it for the memes. And so I use the Seismic Reverberation Lego. It is not good. Never do this. Never use this legendary. It just gives you damage for your revenge, and it's completely worthless on target fights. Most people are running the Reprisal Lego, and we're going to discuss Prot Warrior through that lens, right? We're going to pretend that we're using the Reprisal Lego. So what Reprisal does is it gives you shield block for 4 seconds when you charge and intervene. And it also gives you revenge, and it generates 20 rage. Right? So pretty darn good legendary. Tons of people running this. Its versatility is certainly something that you can utilize in varying levels depending on your skill. But most importantly, it just increases your shield block uptime, right? That's what's really important. Shield block is an incredibly powerful tool as a Prot Warrior, and this makes it better. That's why this is played the most. Outside of that, we have to discuss the Covenant Legendaries, right? Because you're pretty much going to be pigeonholed into selecting one of the 4, and therefore the Covenant ability that comes with it. The Soul Binds, the whole 9 yards. So if we're looking at this through the lens of, okay, I'm playing Reprisal, which Covenant do I select? You have the 4 options, right? You've got Elysian Might through Kyrian. This is going to give you, most likely, Mykonikos as your option. It's going to give you the Elysian Might legendary. And basically what this does is it increases your Spear of Action by 4 seconds. It increases your critical damage while inside it by 25%. And this is where the discussion of Prot Warrior really starts to kick off, right? Because right now, I think the last time I saw the breakdown for Prot Warriors, the majority of them were Kyrian. It's not only because the Spear of Action allows you to kite with the tether effect that it provides, but it's actually just a ton of damage. And then the Kyrian file gives you a certain measure of defense. And there are a couple of other elements that play into it, but for the most part, those are the most important factors in selecting Kyrie in this in this patch, right? But Elysium Might is very underwhelming as an actual legendary. Um, I don't think it'll change a whole lot from like if you're selecting Kyrian right now. I don't think you feel bad about the fact that you're playing Kyrian when you have this Lego. Um, but it's really awkward as a prot warrior to actually be using crit. I mean, you can see here from my character, I have 259 base crit, which equates to 12% overall. It's not something that you stack, right? You want to be stacking haste, you want to be stacking versatility. Right now, I have too much mastery on this guy. But I'm 239 item level, right? Like I'm not playing this character all that much. So ideally, you would have haste and versatility because haste reduces your shield block cooldown as well as your shield slam, right? Both pretty important. So getting the additional haste is important, and then versatility, of course, just increases your damage, reduces your damage taken, increases the size of your ignore pains, stuff like that. Um, so I don't think this is actually going to factor into people's decision of which legendary to choose or which covenant, for that matter. Um, I think this is just something you're going to throw on if you're still deciding to play Kyrian, right? Um, I do want to touch briefly on Venthyr as Prot Warrior. For people who don't know, nobody's really playing Venthyr Prot Warrior in Shadowlands, period. Even in a raiding scenario, you don't play Venthyr. They have made some changes to Venthyr recently that allow you to extend the duration of your avatar through your Condemn. This used to be, I believe, Last Stand that it increased the duration for. It was either Last Stand or Shield Wall. I can't remember which one it was. Um, but it was awful in either regard, right? Because you're increasing the duration of a defensive ability instead of giving you something a little bit more valuable, which is damage, right? Because Prot Warrior doesn't lack necessarily in its uptime of defense when it's playing Reprisal, and increasing the duration during execute phase of something like Shield Wall or Last Stand, can't remember which one, is not nearly as valuable as increasing a um, major damage buff to yourself during that execute phase. So it really plays into it. Unfortunately, Venthyr is plagued by the fact that Condemn really only benefits you during the execution phase, and also because the soulbinds that are presented for you through Venthyr are not great. Naja is okay. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Naja is like awful. Because you get the Thrill Seeker, which gives you a bunch of haste to reduce your shield block and shield slam cooldowns, but generally still not an option that people are taking, right? Because there's better ones available. The two that are going to be interesting in 9.2 are actually going to be Night Fae and, most importantly, Necrolord. We'll get to Necrolord here in a second. Now, the Night Fae Legendary, what that's going to do is it's going to increase the duration of Ancient Aftershock by 3 seconds, and it's going to make it to where it stacks this huge dot on your targets as they're standing in your Ancient Aftershock, right? Very potent. If you actually keep them in there. If you're playing Fury or Arms, as a DPS, you're kind of relying on the tank to keep everything inside of it. And I'm speaking about this through the lens of Mythic Plus, not raiding. In raiding, it's, to an extent, if the boss is standing in your debuff ability, it's because the tank is doing it. But with um, with raiding, a lot of the times, just pure mechanics require movement for bossing, and then also what the actual boss is doing outside of what the tank can control. Oftentimes, will take the boss outside of your dot ability. So, not a lot of people running Nature's Fury right now, is what I'm getting to. And I don't think, especially as Prot in 9.2, you're going to see a lot of people looking to play this in Raid. But you could see it in Mythic Plus because, I mean, just putting it out there, very straightforward reasoning. This does a ton of damage if you keep the ads inside of the area of effect for Ancient Aftershock. If you manage to pull that off, you leave them inside it, you're going to see a significant damage increase. Uh, Again, almost everybody's still going to be running Reprisal unless they tweak this in 9.2, right? But I do think that you're probably going to see people who are currently playing Kyrian for the reasons of damage. I think that you're actually going to see them switch over to Night Fae for the same reasons, right? I think this will be kind of the default option for I want to do as much damage as I possibly can. I think that once you throw on Nature's Fury, the damage of Night Fae is going to be it's going to solidify itself as the superior option over Kyrian. But the most interesting option for Prot Warrior in 9.2 is going to be Necrolord. And it's for a couple of reasons. But, since this is a discussion about the double legendaries, let's go ahead and start with Glory, right? So Conqueror's Banner affects one additional ally, and every 10 rage you spend while it is active increases the duration of your banner by 0.5 seconds. So basically, what Banner does is it increases the mastery of nearby allies, and you can play with it in a way that it gives you strength, and through a conduit and different other means to give yourself a buff. On top of that, Necrolord in itself gives you Fleshcraft, which is by far the most potent defensive option for tanks in terms of like a Covenant specific ability. So getting Fleshcraft is always a bonus. And then, of course, there's some benefits to a couple of the soul binds that make you exceptionally tanky. But the banner is like a support style type of option, right? And Glory really accentuates that power. It gives the mastery benefit to one additional ally. Every 10 rage you spend is going to increase its duration. So you really just start buffing up your friends. And this is going to be especially potent in Mythic Plus when you're talking about buffing up basically your 3 DPS plus yourself with a massive mastery buff, and then actually increasing the duration of that banner by a significant amount. You could see this being played in organized groups. I mean, you already see Necrolord Prot Warrior being played a little bit in organized groups. Notably, Pika, one of the top Prot Warriors in the world, has played some Necrolord in the past. I don't know how much he's playing that recently. I haven't been following his channel lately, but he was definitely using it, and he was pairing this mastery buff with Boomkin and Fire Mage and getting some really good results from it. So as long as you're not pairing the mastery buff with your healer, which generally is not going to give your group a huge damage buff because healers don't benefit their damage through mastery, getting this to DPS will be important. So I think overall, kind of the Covenant selection / double legendary choice for Prot Warrior in the future. Look out for Glory, look out for Necrolord. Could see people go the support route for Prot Warrior as like the established build. All right. Next up here, we're going to look at the Brewmaster Monk. When I first saw this set bonus, not going to lie, I was pretty darn sad. Give me a chance here to pull it up on my screen. All right. So this is the Brewmaster tier set. The 2-piece here targets ignited by Breath of Fire, deal an additional 4% less damage to you. And the 4-piece Breath of Fire empowers your next Tiger Palm or Blackout Kick, increasing shuffle duration and cooldown or brew cooldown reduction by 100%. Now, the first part of this, increasing shuffle duration, not gonna lie, it's a bit of a puzzler to me. With my experience on this character, I don't have an issue keeping shuffle up all the time. So I don't know what the issue is with duration. But that's very odd to me, especially in AoE situations when you're not, when you're selectively opting out of Tiger Palm or Blackout Kick. Using them to reduce your cooldowns of your brews is a bit weird. Although this will feel better when you're in raid. Okay. Also, another thing to keep in mind with the discussion of the tier sets are your talents, and specifically Spitfire, right? So Tiger Palm has a 25% chance to reset the cooldown of Breath of Fire. If we see some number tweaking in this, like if they go with this approach to tier sets. But let's say instead of 4% less damage to you from the Breath of Fire thing, it's like 8% less damage to you instead. And this empowerment is a little bit more potent. You might end up in a discussion where you're like trying to reduce the cooldown of Spitfire or get more of them. Or excuse me, not Spitfire, Breath of Fire. Like if you get more breaths of fire, that might actually be beneficial to you. So something to keep an eye on. I think right now with the tuning of the tier set the way it is, and I can't imagine this will stay the same based on the fact that it's definitely the worst of any of the tier sets of the tanks right now. That will dictate whether Spitfire becomes, like whether it has any chance of being played. Because right now it's not, right. Like, most people are playing Light Brewing. Some people are playing Black Ox Brew. Nobody's playing Spitfire unless they're just memeing out in +6s or something. All right. Oh, also, one other thing that's relevant, cooldown reduction of your brews is really good with a new talent that's kind of developed in the meta right now, which is Special Delivery. Pretty much everybody ran Rushing Jadewind before 9.1.5. Then they buffed Special Delivery damage by 100%. And this has caused Special Delivery to be the meta choice. I've been running this in keys, and it's doing about 1/5 of my damage overall. Hitting targets critting targets especially for over 3,000 damage. So extremely potent. It's also applying a slow. I don't know if this will survive into 9.2. They buffed it by 100%, which is a massive amount. And I don't know if it's going to stay the same because it's also applying the slow. If Rushing Jadewind did something like increase your dodge chance against enemies being hit by it, then you could argue, okay, well this has like a defensive aspect to it as well. But since Special Delivery allows you to do what you're already trying to do in Mythic Plus, which is kite, adding a tremendous amount of damage on top of that, more so than Rushing Jadewind provides, is just making this like the obvious choice for everybody now. Okay. So double legendaries. When it comes to Brewmaster Monk, there are really just a couple of legendaries being played right now. So you've got Storm Stout's Last Keg. This is a copy over of a Legion legendary called Storm Stout's Last Grasp, I believe. And basically what this does is make Cake Smash do more damage and have an additional charge. Now, the actual smoothness of your gameplay through Cake Smash is extremely rewarding and very satisfying when you have 2 charges of Cake Smash as opposed to 1. And because of that, this legendary is played by most Brewmaster Monks. If you're going for more damage, though, Charred Passions has a chance of being better. Basically, what this does is your Breath of Fire ignites your right leg and in flame for 8 seconds, causing your Blackout Kick and Spinning Crane Kick to deal 100% additional damage as fire damage from restoration of your Breath of Fire on the target. Again, this is relevant because the tier set bonus is making it to where your Breath of Fire debuff is applying an even more potent damage reduction ability. See 4% less. I believe by default it's 10%, right? Nope, 5%. So it'll go from 5 to 4 or 5 to 9%. Again, playing into the discussion about the talent, Spitfire, and about the potential of switching over to Charred Passions, right? So now that we've established which of these 2 legendaries we could potentially choose, and it really is between these 2, right? Not a whole lot of discussion outside of these 2. There is the defensive option, which is... do I even have the defensive one? I do not. Purifying Brew has a 25% chance to not consume a charge, and Celestial Brew increases your armor by 50% for 8 seconds. This is a defensive option. You can see by the fact that I haven't even obtained it, because it drops from Fire Denathrius, and I didn't raid on this character. It's very straightforward to assume that this is a potential option for you with the tier set. But again, the tuning of this is going to, like, in a 10-minute boss fight, based on the math that I've seen so far, this 100% cooldown reduction through your Breath of Fire hits is going to roughly amount to about 2 extra uses of Celestial Brew in a boss fight. So that 50% increased armor bonus for 8 seconds is really only going to happen twice in a boss fight. That's pretty lackluster and why a lot of people are criticizing the Brewmaster set. So, I mean, if you want to start machine gunning brews with this tier set, this 100%'s got to become a bigger number. All right. So Covenant specific legendaries. The only one that I have unlocked on this guy is Call to Arms. I've only been playing one Covenant on this monk. Weapons of Order calls forth Nizao, the Black Ox, to assist you for 12 seconds. It's an exact replica of the actual spell Invoke Nizao, the Black Ox. And this guy will basically stomp damage when you Purifying Brew. He also um, basically delays your stagger. I think it's 25% of damage delayed by stagger is instead staggered by Nizao. A potent offensive and defensive option. You know, it's a celestial for a monk, right? They're all powerful. So this is basically going to have him called down to assist you. Now, the potency of Call to Arms is increased when you're playing Mechanicos because this will reduce, if you hit 5 enemies, for example, it'll reduce the cooldown of your Weapons of Order by 40 seconds, right? 8 seconds per affected enemy. So even in a boss fight, it'll be reduced to 1 minute and 52 seconds. This is, base cooldown of 2 minutes. But if you reduce it by 40, it's 1 minute and 20 seconds, right? So having a 12-second Black Ox every minute and 20 seconds equates to a 10% uptime on your Invoke Musou proc from this Call to Arms legendary, right? Plus you have the natural, I think 20 seconds. Nope, 25 seconds for Nizao in this. So your uptime on your Invoke Nizao will roughly be 15-20%, which is certainly awesome. So this is not a bad Covenant legendary, and there will be further discussions, I believe, about the viability of this down the road. Not a lot of people, if any, are playing a Call to Arms right now, like as a base, because of the strength of Stormstout's last cake. But if you're playing Kyrian in 9.2, you're gonna have this guy for sure, and it's definitely gonna be satisfying to pop Weapons of Order. If you're also getting a new Zao out of it, so even more damage, even more defense when you pop this cooldown. Very, very satisfying, and I think it'll put Kyrian up even further. All right, so the other options here: Bountiful Brew. If you're looking for an in-depth explanation of how these other Covenant abilities work, I'm not going to be your best guide on that for Brewmaster Monk specifically, but I do have some experience with Night Fae, so we'll just go over that. Bountiful Brew for Necrolord, though, your abilities have a low chance to cast Bone Dust Brew at your target's location. Now, the reason this is relevant is because Bone Dust Brew actually plays into Stormstout's last cake. It's basically understood that if you're going to be running Stormstout's last cake, you want to be Necrolord or Kyrian, and that's because their abilities play into Cake Smash itself. So getting a buff to Bone Dust Brew in any way is beneficial. The fact that it has a chance to cast Bone Dust Brew at your target's location is going to increase the potency of your Cake Smash on those targets, and further increase your ability to do lots of dam. So it'll be interesting where this falls. I think the discussion around Necrolord Monk always falls on the discussion of defense over offense. I don't think this will change much, if anything. I believe the actual gap in damage from Necrolord to Kyrian will be increased by Call to Arms compared to Bountiful Brew, but we might see some balancing on this, right? So don't hold my feet to the fire on that statement a few months from now. I also don't know what the actual percentage, like the proc chance of this is. It says low chance. If that low chance is really bad, then I don't even know if you can have a discussion about offense when you're talking about the Necrolord ability. Certainly on paper seems like it lacks a little bit of oomph, but we'll see what the tuning looks like. All right, so Sinister Teachings. This one is a Covenant Legendary that's being used a lot right now by Mistweaver monks. However, for Brewmaster monks, pretty much nobody's playing it. Fallen Order summons one additional Ox Adept for 24 seconds. While you have an while you have an active Adapt, your abilities that critically hit reduce the cooldown of Fallen Order by 5 seconds. Obviously, this incentivizes you to build crit as a monk. It's something that I already do, having 33% of it myself, 800 base crit on a character that's 248 item level. Although I will say, based on my own gameplay, my experiences with the class, I think this expansion, versatility is the way to go, especially if you're running light brewing. You could reduce the cooldown of your Celestial Brew to 48 seconds. It feels pretty good to be stacking versatility because you get those bigger Celestial Brews far more consistently. Although, you do have a chance of proccing your Celestial Fortune, which is a passive that increases the effectiveness of your. Let's see, pull it up here so that I'm not misquoting it here. You have a chance equal to your critical strike chance to be healed for an additional 65% of the amount healed. This applies to absorbs as well, so it works for Discipline Priests. It also works for your Celestial Brew. So if you have a lots of crit, there's a chance that your Celestial Brew will be even more powerful. So crit's not bad, and it certainly gives you a bunch of damage, but versatility I find a little bit more consistent. But yeah, back to the discussion of the double legendary here. I don't think Venthyr is going to be bad in 9.2. It's really cool to get additional power spikes when you're talking about your Invoke. The problem I see with this legendary is that it's just working off a cooldown that's 3-minute long, right? So, or excuse me, it's not working off the cooldown that's 3 minutes long. I actually don't know what the cooldown of Fallen Order is, now that I think about it. I think it's a 2-minute cooldown. Let's go ahead and look that up real quick. I don't want to. I don't want to be a dummy on this one. Yeah, it's a 3-minute cooldown. That's what I thought. Yeah, so 3-minute cooldown, Fallen Order here. Opens the Mystic Portal for 24 seconds. Every 3 seconds, it summons a spirit of your Order's fallen ox, crane, or tiger adepts. Does its thing. So you basically get an additional adept. I wish I had more experience with this. I wish I could tell you guys whether I think this is going to be good when paired with something else. But it's pretty clear right off the bat this does not have synergy with anything else. So unless just the tuning in itself commands some level of play, like they just make this so powerful that you kind of have to play it regardless of whether it has synergy or not. I don't think it's going to see a lot of play. We'll see though. We shall see. All right, so the one that I do have some experience with is Phalanx Stomp, the Night Fate Covenant ability. The legendary itself I haven't used yet. Your abilities reset Phalanx Stomp 100% more often. Enemies and allies hit by Phalanx Stomp are affected by Fate Exposure, increasing your damage and healing against them by 8% for 10 seconds. Pretty interesting that because it obviously, it increases your damage, but it also increases healing against them by 8%. So this is relevant for your Mistweaver monks as well, right? 8% damage increase is not a ton, although it certainly can add up. The most appealing part of this Covenant Legendary is the fact that it has a 100% additional increase on the Phalanx Stomp reset, right? Now, I believe the Phalanx Stomp reset chance right now is 8% on instances of damage. And you actually have to be standing inside of your Phalanx Stomp to activate it. And I'm going to go ahead and run over here real quick so that you guys can see what that actually looks like. One of the beauties of 9.1.5 is I can just run over here, swap covenants without really any issue, and it feels great. Make sure I don't have any missions going. Pull up the ability real quick. All right. So the actual AoE of this Phalanx Stomp is not good. It's linear, it's not wide enough. The actual graphical understanding of it, in terms of like where am I actually not standing in it as opposed to in it, is not straightforward at all. Because it looks like I'm out of it, but I might be in it here, right? And there's different, it's not like a square. It's not a circle. It has these little veins that are coming out of it, and they disappear as the effect is up, right? So you actually have to stand in this tank. Now, one thing that's obviously very bad about that is that monks are a kiting tank, right? When you run into a big pull in Mythic Plus and you run out of your cooldowns, say your brews are down, you've exhausted your dampen harm or whatever cooldowns you're using, you don't want to stand in front of the pack. So you basically, if you want to get the full benefit of this legendary, right here, in order to get the full benefit of this legendary, you're going to have to put yourself in a situation where you're standing in a place you may not want to stand, um, but you're not going to do because you're not going to kill yourself for extra damage, right? But it naturally is going to reduce the value of this legendary because not all your abilities are going to be used while you're actually standing inside that Phalanx Stomp. That for me is the biggest drawback of Night Fae and why I don't think it's going to see a lot of play. And I do believe that this Covenant Legendary is fairly lackluster. I would have liked to have seen, if they were to do anything with this Legendary, it would be that instead of increasing the chance of it resetting, you actually just massively increase or change what this ability looks like on the ground, right? So instead of shooting out this straight stem that kind of blooms at the top, which I agree it looks cool, but instead like make it more like a weed where it shoots out in like a semicircle. You know what I mean? Like a uh, giant weed spreading out of the ground, where you have individual veins starting very early in the stem that are shooting out and basically making it impossible for you to like even be over here and not be standing in it. Right? It's really important. Um, so that's my opinion on how that Covenant ability should probably work, but more importantly, how the Covenant Legendary kind of needs to work in order for it to see play in Mythic Plus. For rating, it's not as big of a deal, um, although it's still subject to the same issue where mechanics may take you out of this, and you could knock it out, and then 6 seconds later have to run out of it, and then effectively because of how this Covenant Legendary is working, you're going to get zero benefit from the Legendary itself. So, in closing, I still think that Kyrion's going to be the way to go, based on how Call to Arms works. It's going to give you that Black Ox, and I think that by default, Kyrian is the best Covenant for monks. So I think this will actually make it even more linear in its approach. Okay. One second here. All right. So next character. Blood Decay. Now we're getting into the more nuanced things because I actually have some experience with these guys. Beyond just one covenant. So that's going to be very helpful in having these discussions about uh, the impact of the different legendaries. So Blood Decay is pretty interesting in the sense that it has several legendaries that it uses. Right now, Crimson Rune Weapon is the most popular one in Mythic Plus, although Super Strain is seeing some play. Let me go ahead and pull up the Blood Decay tier set so you guys can understand kind of what's coming. The two set here, Parring Attack causes your weapon to lash out, Heart Striking your attacker, and Dancing Weapon now summons 2 rune weapons. Heart Strike increases your strength by 1%, and the duration of Dancing Weapon by 0.5 seconds, persisting 10 seconds after Dancing Weapon ends. So they're making a dancing weapon tier set. And that has some positives and negatives. Obviously, the positives are the tier set itself looks really cool. If you're looking for an in depth discussion on this tier set specifically and how I think it'll interact, go ahead and check out an earlier video that I released 3 or 4 days ago before this one. Um, it's a pretty solid tier set, looks really cool. I think that it's going to be very powerful. But there is one unforeseen side effect that I don't think Blizzard is thinking about, or they could be thinking about it. Who knows? And that is that Crimson Rune Weapon actively reduces the cooldown of your Dancing Weapon by a significant amount, right? And that is uh, it's really good. But if you're releasing a Dancing Weapon tier set, it's difficult to imagine that it's not going to be mandatory that people run this as their legendary, right? And since you're already forced into taking your Covenant legendary with the current Covenant you're playing, there may not be a lot of choice in 9.2. There won't be a lot of experimentation if they continue to have it built like this. And since this is actually just really cool, I don't see a reason for them not to do this um, outside of this, right? Crimson Rune Weapon is already powerful. People are already using it, and it's reducing the cooldown from Dancing Weapon from 2 minutes down to, 45 seconds in some occasions, right? And when you do that, uh, giving an incentive for additional dancing weapons and duration is really just going to make this the only or the only legendary selection. Um, that being said, there are still some people who might try out Bryndower's Might, or Gorfiend's combination was going to be pretty cool. I will say this though, when I thought double legendaries were going to happen and it wasn't Covenant specific, I was looking specifically at the synergy between Gorfiend's Domination and Vampiric Aura in Mythic Plus, paired with the talent Red Thirst on the bottom tier here for Blood Decay. And basically, what these do are, Gorfiend's Domination reduces the cooldown of your Vampiric Blood based on the number of heart strikes you've done, and Red Thirst reduces the cooldown even further based on the runic power that you've spent, which is obviously really cool. You've got runic power reducing the cooldown, you've got heart strikes reducing the cooldown, and Vampiric Blood in itself is an incredibly powerful cooldown, right? It's giving you 30% additional health, it's increasing all of your healing and absorbs received by 35%, and it lasts 12 seconds, which is a pretty lengthy cooldown, right? And then you have Vampiric Aura, which grants you 5% leech for its duration, and its duration is increased by 3 seconds, increasing the uptime for your Vampiric Blood by even more, right? If you're talking about these two cooldowns combined, you get the cooldown down to like 30% or 30 seconds. And since you've got a 15-second Vampiric Blood, um, that would be incredibly powerful. In addition, your Vampiric Blood is going to affect all your party members for 50% of its effect that it has on you. So essentially, it's going to give your party 15% increased health, and it's going to increase all healing and absorbs received by 17.5%. That's obviously, at face value, incredibly broken. There were a lot of synergies like this in other classes as well, where you looked at it and you're like, holy smokes, that's probably going to be pretty crazy. And I don't think that Blizzard wanted to tackle the complications associated with trying to balance some of the synergies they developed in these legendaries. Right? So what we're left with is choosing a covenant. Now, right now, I played Necrolord on this character pretty much exclusively. I have some Night Fae experience on the guy as well, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But let's just go ahead and start with Abomination's Frenzy. So Abomination's limb duration is increased by 4 seconds, and the frequency it grants Bone Shield is increased by 2 seconds. The first time an enemy is damaged by Abom Limb, they take 10% increased damage from you for 12 seconds. This isn't horrible, but one thing that I think that people should consider, when you increase the duration of this by 4 seconds, it's increasing its damage, which is nice, but the actual Bone Shield charge thing associated with it, the frequency of it, right now it gives me a Bone Shield, or gives me 3 Bone Shields every 6 seconds. after I initially cast it. I think the actual total Bone Shield charges it gives me over the course of the 12 seconds, the base ability, when it's not increased in duration, is 9. I think it's 9 charges. I can only have a maximum of 10. And right now, since everyone's running Crimson Rune Weapon, which is giving you five Bone Shield charges, um, generally, even without a whole lot of planning, this is always going to overcap you already on Bone Shield charges. It just is. It's giving you too many for the short period of time. There's an internal cooldown for how quickly the Bone Shield charges can be absorbed. So, um, increasing the frequency in which it's granting you Bone Shield charges is kind of like dead text. It's pretty much irrelevant. But the damage debuff basically that you're going to apply to things when you first hit them is certainly relevant, especially during Abomination Limb, which does a pretty significant amount of damage. So very interesting. Um, but I think fundamentally it'll just act as a damage increase during your Abomination Limb. So roughly 16 seconds every 2 minutes, you're going to do 10% increased damage to everything around you. All right, so let's talk about Venthyr and the double legendary option here. So again, as we talked about, the tier set is not creating a lot of discussion around your non-covenant specific legendary, because if this stays the way that it is right now, in its design purpose, um, you're going to be forced into playing Dancing Room Weapon or Crimson Room Weapon, right? You're going to have to play this. So let's talk about Insatiable Hunger. When Swarming Mist ends, it deals 2,400 and 63 shadow damage to 5 nearby enemies, healing you for 25% of the damage dealt. The damage is increased by 2% for every 1 runic power spent while Swarming Mist was active. I have not tweaked with this legendary, but I have seen it be used in stream for other people pushing keys or just, being used randomly. Um, and, the jury is pretty much out. Nobody really uses this. And it's mainly because the damage and specifically the healing are pretty underwhelming for what you actually get out of it. It also kind of forces you, in order to get the most out of it, to play an irresponsible play style, and that is to try to get as many heart strikes into that window as you possibly can. You also kind of want to play Bone Storm with it because you can drop a lot of runic power right off the bat um, when you're using it. But generally, what you're going to do in order to incentivize the damage and healing of this is try to come out of your Swarming Mist with no runic power, having spent all of it to get more damage from this, right? Because the damage is increased by 2% for every 1 runic power spent while Swarming Mist was active. So you're going to try to burn all your runic power, and then you're going to run out of runic power, and then you're going to have this like vulnerable area after Swarming Mist ends where you did all the damage, the healing, where you're going to have to bank your runic power again. Overall, probably doesn't feel very good to play, and most importantly, the healing of it is incredibly unsubstantial. So consumption, I did test Insatiable Hunger out on the PTR. It doesn't do anywhere near the healing of consumption, right? So if it's getting outperformed dramatically by this talent, which nobody takes, why would someone take the legendary, right? So the discussion continues. A lot of people are playing Venthyr though, so people might still opt to play Venthyr, and therefore they're kind of pigeonholed, obviously, into taking a legendary that is kind of awkward to play with. All right, so the next one we're going to talk about is Final Sentence. This is the worst one for Blood Decay, and I'll go over why. When Shackle the Unworthy spreads, instantly gain a rune, and your damage is increased by 3%, stacking up to 15% for 18 seconds. So when you read that initially, you think to yourself, wow, every time I spread Shackle the Unworthy, I'm going to get a rune, and I'm going to get a damage increase. And when I've got 7 or 8 targets in front of me, Spreading it's not all that difficult now because it's increased to 100% up from 50% as part of the 9.1.5 buff. I could get a lot of damage and a lot of runes from this. The problem is that rune generation for Blood Decay, because you're stacking haste, isn't enough of a problem to where you need a rune every time you spend one. Because generally, you're going to be spreading most of your Shackle the Unworthies stacks on your enemy with a Heart Strike, which only costs one rune, right? So you're basically just you're never going to run out of runes with this, but it's also going to give you a massive surplus of runes, right? I mean, during the Shackle the Unworthy power spike, I'd be shocked if you just straight up never had more than all of your runes, or never had less than all of your runes, right? Like it's impossible to fathom that you would not have all your runes up when you're using this Covenant Legendary, which is not necessary, right? That's what I call an excess of resources that you can't use. Generally, what you want is really potent resources that you can use efficiently so that you don't run out, right? Also, something to keep in mind here, you're probably your first instinct is to play this through your mind of when you have 6, 7, 8, 9 enemies in front of you. But what if you only have one? What if it's a boss? Let's read this again. Keeping in mind that you're now in an encounter that only has one enemy. When Shackle the Unworthy spreads, and that's the key word, when it spreads, you'll instantly gain a rune and your damage will be increased by 3%, stacking up to 15% for 18 seconds. So this doesn't increase the damage of Shackle the Unworthy, and it doesn't give you runes or any other benefit based on the base effect of Shackle the Unworthy. This is all about spreading it. Now, one thing that's unfortunate is that when you're fighting only one enemy, Shackle the Unworthy will never spread. Not once. And that makes this legendary completely ineffective against one target. So, in order for this to be a viable option whatsoever in 9.2, when we go to a double legendary setup, in Raid especially, they're going to have to change this, right? But even if you look at it in Mythic Plus, especially on Tyrannical Weeks, or if you're in Theater of Pain, for example, this is a very, very weak legendary. They're going to have to do something to change it. All right, moving on to the next one, and I believe the most important for the discussion of Blood Decay. Now, I'm going to premise this statement with the following statements by saying that not a lot of people are playing Night Fae Blood Decay right now. Last I saw from the breakdown, it's less than 1% of people in 20 keys or higher are running are running Night Fae. So let's take a look at Rampant Transference here. The strength gained from Death's Due is increased by 2% and persists for 2 seconds longer. While standing within your Death's Due, your runic power generation is increased by 20%. Now, after reading Insatiable Hunger, Final Sentence, Abomination's Frenzy to an extent, this looks obviously more powerful. Clearly more powerful. So we're actually going to go over here because I want to illustrate to you guys real quick what this looks like. It's really important that you guys know what the actual Covenant ability does when you're talking about this. You get a really decent understanding of exactly what's going to happen when people start playing Night Fae 9.2, which I think will happen a lot. Certainly more than 1%. Okay. So this replaces your Death and Decay with an ability called Death's Due when you're in Night Fae. While you remain within the area of your Death's Due, your Heart Strike will hit up to 3 additional targets and inflict Death's Due to your target for 12 seconds. Death's Due reduces damage enemies deal to you by 2% up to a maximum of 8%, and their power is transferred to you as an equal amount of strength. Basically, what that means is you're going to gain 8% strength when you get 4 stacks of Death's Due. Not a difficult thing to achieve, by the way. Getting 8% strength during your Death's Due spikes, very, very easy. Very, very easy. Oop. Don't want that. Or that. What's going on here? Keybinds work for me. All right. So let's take a look at Rampant Transference. Now, keeping in mind, of course, that we get 8% strength already from Death's Due at 4 stacks. Okay? So Rampant Transference gained, the strength gained from Death's Due is increased by 2% and persists for 2 seconds longer. All right? So right now, that buff in itself lasts for 12 seconds. It's going to last for 14 seconds. And instead of getting 8% strength at 4 stacks, you're now going to get 16% strength at 4 stacks. 16% strength, I believe. Let me go ahead and pull this up real quick. Yeah. 16% strength is more strength than you get from a Fallen Crusader proc. It is a massive amount of strength, obviously. But the fact that it's even more than this random proc, and you're going to be keeping that buff up close to infinitely because of the duration of it and the resets of your Death's Due as part of this passive right here. It's called Crimson something. Crimson Scourge. Has a chance to make your next Death and Decay cost now runes and reset its cooldown, right? And this happens fairly often. So your uptime on the strength buff is going to be huge. You're also, of course, getting the DPS, or excuse me, you're getting the damage reduction of this as well. Please keep that in mind. Now, this is not increasing the potency of that damage reduction. It's only increasing the strength, but strength, of course, increases your parry chance, increases your armor because of the fact that it applies to your bone shield charges as part of your strength converting to the armor bonus of your bone shields, right? So what does this mean? It means that Rampant Transference is by far the best Covenant Legendary in 9.2 for Blood Decay. It also does not contradict or impact the playstyle of Dancing Weapon or the subsequent Legendary Crimson Rune Weapon. Right? It just adds on to an ability that you're already using very conveniently for your own self gain, which is your Death and Decay. Right? So very strong, very potent, but also, of course, you can't underestimate the impact that this is going to have from your runic regeneration or your runic power generation, right? The fact that it'll be increased by 20% when you're standing in your Death's Due, which is, I mean, not a small cooldown, right? Or excuse me, not a small AoE. The cooldown is small. The actual AoE of it is convenient to stand in, but you can get the 4 stacks to it pretty quickly and then kite afterward and still get all the benefit, right? So you're going to see this played quite a bit. I'm telling you right now it's like 1% of Blood Decays playing Night Fae. I wouldn't be surprised if it's much higher than that in 9.2. And it's always good to get diversity in Covenant selection. Unfortunately, I would also like to see that paired with the diversity in Legendary selection and with the tier set coming out having entirely to do with your Dancing Weapon pretty much. The diversity and legendary choice outside of Covenant is going to be greatly reduced, which is unfortunate. All right. Talked enough about Blood Decay. Talked about Guardian. Guardian's going to be interesting. And I think that you're going to have the most diverse selection of legendaries in 9.2. And that's for one specific reason, having to do with the tier set. My mind has been changed based on a couple of discussions that I've had with other Guardian Druids. My initial take on this is available on my YouTube channel. I've since changed my opinion on this already, but we're going to chat about that. All right, first the tier set. You see here, 2 set. Casting Barkskin causes you to Berserk for 4 seconds. Pretty potent, pretty awesome, especially considering, pull this out of the way here, even further, I guess. Barkskin's cooldown right now for me is 49 seconds, right? That is not a lengthy cooldown at all. You can also take a talent, called Survival of the Fittest, to reduce its cooldown by an additional 33%, right? So getting a Berserk every 4 seconds, Berserk or Incarn, right? Not worded completely there, but I can assure you it's going to work on Incarn as well. And basically what it's going to do is give you an ability to thrash, or mangle. Just throw a whole bunch of very potent spells in. Get the increased health also from your Incarn, which is certainly not something to to overlook. It's 30% increased maximum health while your bark skin is active for 4 seconds, right? That's really huge. Very, very tanky. So the second part here, the 4-piece set, while berserked, you radiate 45% of attack power, cosmic damage. That's pretty weird. Never seen cosmic damage before. We're gonna see if that's like playing into the next expansion or something. To nearby enemies and heal yourself for 61% of attack power every 1 second. Now, I'm not concerned about the numbers here. This is so early on in the tuning process that like looking at specific percentages of attack power. This is, I mean, they might have nailed it on the head, but it's also very possible that these numbers will change. So let's just look at the base design of it, right? They're looking to basically have you radiate damage and heal yourself every 1 second when you pop your Incarn, right? This is relevant for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're running Ursoc's Fury Remembered right now, which is pretty much the default choice by most Guardian Druids, especially in Mythic Plus. If you're running Ursoc's Fury Remembered right now, you are capping yourself with this Absorption Shield. Now, a lot of people don't know this. The Absorption Shield that has been, and I have it tracked here, the Absorption Shield that is provided by this Ursoc's Fury Remembered has a cap. It's based on your percentage max HP. You can't stack this shield up if you're not taking any damage to like 100k. It'll cap out at a certain number and it won't go beyond that, right? Generally, if you're in a massive trash pack pull, healing yourself is the last thing that you're thinking about because you have such a huge absorption shield that any small amount of healing whatsoever from your healer is going to ensure that you're just simply never going to die during your Incarn. So this whatever percentage of attack power heal every 1 second is pretty much exclusively um, going to be counted as overhealing, right? It's not going to be relevant. However, let's take a look at that from a different angle. I think that it's really important that we do this. So everyone's running Ursoc's Fury Remembered right now. But if we're going to have a heal during our Incarn the entire time, what's to stop somebody from trying to reduce the cooldown of it? If that heal is enough to keep you alive, along with the tankiness that you're going to be getting from Bark Skin, Survival Instincts, just your natural ability to produce armor during Bark Skin or during Incarn, because it's reducing the, it's dramatically reducing the cost of Iron Fur, right? I think Iron Fur drops to like it costs 20 rage instead of 40 when you're under Incarn. So it's extremely potent defensively, right? And you don't have to have Ursoc's Fury Remembered to be benefiting from a lot of the benefits that Incarn give you. You're already going to be extremely difficult to kill. So what's stopping you from reducing the cooldown? Bring it down to 30%. Now you get Incarn. Now your Incarn gives you 25% increased damage. It gives you Leech. It gives you immunity to effects that cause you to lose control, and it reduces cooldown by 30 seconds. And right now, it's kind of a pain point to have it sit at 3 minutes. Reducing it lower than that allows you to be a little bit more flexible with your routes in Mythic Plus. This is something that you could see being played by everyone except really Venthyr Druids. Venthyr Druids have a 3-minute a CD that they really like to pair with Incarn. So reducing the cooldown of Incarn would be a bad thing. You probably won't see them using this. Although I will say, it's not an impossible thing to consider because you're still going to gain the increased damage during Incarn, which is going to stack even further with the Venthyr Covenant ability. We'll talk about that here in a second. But another option available to Guardian Druids in 9.2 is the ability to actually play Natural Order's Will. If you're getting healed during your Incarn, you may still be unkillable, and Natural Order's Will is by far the tankiest legendary outside of Ursoc's Fury Remembered, right? It increases the potency of your bark skin, reducing the damage by an additional 10% while it's active. And when it begins or ends in bear form, you gain Iron Fur and Frenzied Regeneration. Very, very strong, very potent. And considering, if you're running Natural Order's Will, you're gaining this tier set bonus that makes your Berserk proc when your Bark Skin goes off. You might consider running Survival of the Fittest over Earthward, right? Because you're getting so many benefits from your Bark Skin at that point. It may actually be worth trying to reduce its cooldown by an additional 15 seconds or so, down to close to 30 seconds, right? So very interesting to think about, because when Ursox Fear Remembered first came out, everyone was playing it in season one who were actually playing Guardian Druid. It wasn't recognized yet as the powerhouse pick that it was by a lot of people, but that since has changed, right? People pretty much understand now that Ursox makes you unkillable. But it's cool. This is the opposite of what Blood Decay is doing. It's cool that it's opening up some possibilities. The tier set opening up possibilities of different legendaries. I think that's a step in a good direction for Guardian Druid, and I hope there's a little bit more diversity. All right, so Covenant legendaries. We're going to start with a couple that I don't have experience with, that I don't think are going to be relevant at all. So Necrolord suffers from the exact same issue that the Kyrian Covenant legendary suffers from, in the sense that it's based entirely off of its spreading in a way instead of its actual effect. The reason that sucks is because when you're facing a single target, like if you're fighting a tyrannical boss, this Locust Swarm legendary has absolutely no effect whatsoever. Not increasing the potency of your Covenant ability, it's just increasing the chance for it to split into two swarms each time it jumps. Um, I suppose it's relevant to an extent because it can jump to two allies and increase the healing on them. But you're not doing any healing as a Guardian Druid anyway. One second here. All right. So not a good time. And I think this will further disincentivize people playing Necrolord Guardian. Um, people weren't playing Necrolord Guardian for the most part in 9.1 or 9.0. I mean, it's basically been a dead covenant for Guardian. There have been some people playing it in raid with um, Feral Affinity, and then not convoking. Well, I mean, you could convoke in cat form for sure, but more or less shape shifting with Heart of the Wild and getting some dots off during the Locust Swarm power spikes. But uh, definitely not a widespread thing. All right, so the other Covenant selection is one that's very interesting, and it's certainly something that could see some play in 9.2. And that's the Kyrian Covenant ability mixed with this legendary Kindred Affinity. So normally, what the Kyrian ability does is it allows you to empower an ally, granting them a benefit based on your role and granting you a benefit based on their role, right? So if you empower an ally, it'll reduce their damage taken, and then they will give you some damage in return. What this will do, this Kindred Affinity legendary, is allow you to empower that bond um, in a new way that actually will give you a tremendous amount of stats, right? Um, Now, baseline, it's going to give you 150 mastery. If the person that you bonded with is Kyrian, it's going to give you 8% haste if the person you bonded with is Night Fae, 8% crit chance if they're Venthyr, or 8% versatility if they're Necrolord, right? This is really cool. It provides you with different buffs that you may want in a dungeon, but also, most importantly, it allows you to target which player you want to give this buff to during power spikes in Lust Phase or on a trash pack. Like, let's say you want to, um, Giga buff a Windwalker monk that's in your group, right? Let's say that Windwalker's playing Necrolord. You empower the bond. And since this bonus is doubled while the bond is empowered, your ally is not only going to have the 8% versatility, he's going to have an additional 8 on top of that, and he's going to be able to nuke the pack with 16% increased damage, essentially, right? Very powerful. It's more of a support style. You do get the Kyrian File, which has some defensive benefits. Most specifically, is your ability to take bleeds off of yourself, which are particularly potent against Guardian Druid, because bleeds negate your armor benefits, which is a very, very large amount of your damage mitigation for Bear Druid, is through your Iron Fur stacks. But also, it allows you to get rid of diseases as well, which is another big weakness of Bear Druid. It does also take off curses and poisons, but you can do that with your remove corruption, so less valuable in that way. But it rounds off your ability to take deadly effects off of yourself by opening up options for bleeds and diseases as well. So Kyrian as a whole, solid Covenant option even right now, but it's more of a support play style. And I think that the support play style will certainly be improved upon in 9.2 when you can run this legendary and give your healer or your DPS large stat bonuses and empower those once a minute for 10 seconds during key times in fights. All right, so the next one that we want to talk about is Sinful Hysteria, right? I think this is the one that's getting the most hype in terms of potential in 9.2. Give me 1 second here. All right, sorry about that break there, folks. A little bit of thing with my son there. Needed to go help out for a second. All right, so this is the one that's getting the most hype, the Sinful Hysteria one. Each time Ravenous Frenzy is applied, its duration it's increased, or excuse me, each time Ravenous Frenzy is applied, its duration is increased by 0.2 seconds. Additionally, Ravenous Frenzy lingers and will not overcome you for 5 seconds. The last part of that is only relevant when you're not able to cast spells. That's very, very rare, and it's also pretty interesting that there are a lot of situations where you think the the stun that comes after you don't cast spells for a while when the effect is still under happening to you is going to come through and actually doesn't. I've noticed a couple of times I've been stunned for like 4 seconds, and Sinful Hysteria was, or the the frenzy was still actually active on me and had not ended, even though I hadn't cast a spell in the last 4 seconds. So I don't know if that's intentional. It's been a bit wonky, but it's pretty cool to see. But it's interesting how this works, right? You're basically only using this legendary to increase the duration of your Ravenous Frenzy, right? And the reason that's relevant is because right now, Ravenous Frenzy lasts 20 seconds, is on a 3-minute cooldown. And as you can tell, Incarnation is also on a 3-minute cooldown. So you basically pair these two to get a massive damage spike, preferably on a very large pack of monsters, right? Go in a Mythic Plus, pull half the dungeon, and then hope it's all dead before your Incarn runs out, right? That goal is improved significantly when you're Venthyr, because your Ravenous Frenzy increases your damage, it increases your haste, and if you're running the Potency Conduit coming with Venthyr, it's also increasing your critical strike chance, right? Um, the issue with Ravenous Frenzy, if you could call it that, right? Because your damage is still insane, is that Sinful or Ravenous Frenzy only lasts 20 seconds, Incarn lasts 30 seconds. Basically, what this legendary is going to allow you to do is stack it up to the point where Ravenous Frenzy is actually going to last slightly longer than your Incarn will. It's very important that you understand that this will increase the uptime of your Ravenous Frenzy to help it coincide with the duration ending for your Incarn. Um, Now, Balanced Druids are already running this for the same reason. They're trying to get this cooldown to line up with their Celestial Alignment, where they can get as much duration from it as possible. And of course, it increases stacks, which is going to increase your haste, your crit, and your damage by even more, because you're having a longer period of time to get those stacks up higher and higher. The same thing is it's going to work exactly the same for Bear Druid. Basically, the way this is going to work in 9.2, the functionality of it, you're going to pop your Incarn and you're going to, on a large pack, thrash until the duration ends, basically. And this is going to function as a massive damage increase during those power spikes. It won't change your playstyle whatsoever. If you're already playing Guardian Druid with the Venthyr Covenant, you're going to be doing the exact same thing. You're just going to be doing more damage. Excuse me. All right, now on to what I think is probably the most uncertain Covenant legendary that you can choose for Guardian Druid, that being Celestial Spirits. This reduces the Convoke the Spirits cooldown by 50%, sorry, and its duration is reduced by 25%. It'll also have an increased chance to use an exceptional spell or ability. One thing that it doesn't say in the text specifically is that when you reduce the duration by 25%, you're also reducing the number of spells it casts by 25%. So right now, the way this works is if you're in bear form and you convoke, it'll fire off 16 druid spells and abilities over 6 seconds. Now, this is greatly impacted by which shapeshift form you're in. So, for example, if I hit my keybind to pop into my celestial form or my boomkin form, right? Got my moonkin form here. And I cast this on enemies, it's going to favor spells like Moonfire, Wrath, Star Surge, Starfire. If you are Balance Affinity, it will allow you to use, like, you'll get, what's the ability called? Oh my god, the one that rains down a bunch of stars. It's probably best if I don't remember the name. But it increases your AoE damage, right? The point is you're going to get some Moonkin spells from it, right? If you pop into cat form, you're going to be getting kitty form spells. And also, oh, by the way, for Moonkin form, on occasion, it'll cast a big moon that falls onto the group and does a bunch of AoE damage, right? That's its exceptional spell. For cat form, you'll be firing off a bunch of shreds, a bunch of rakes, ferocious bites, and then the exceptional spell. I don't know what it is in cat form because I don't use feral affinity really at all. I did a little bit of feral affinity in Castle Nathria when I was raiding with this character, just for the movement speed on some fights, but I wasn't even paying attention to which spells were being used. I would basically just convoke, and then I would ferocious bite afterwards, and then I was right back into bear form. But yeah, it'll favor cat abilities. If you're in base form, it'll use healing spells, again, favoring things like regrowth, rejuvenation. It has a chance of using Flourish as the exceptional spell, which is pretty potent if you're running the Resto Affinity. And that's how it works in Restoration as well. It'll fire off with Flourish. But in bear form, the exceptional spell is Pulverize. Now, Pulverize is a talent here. Devastating blow that consumes 2 stacks of your thrash on the target to deal 3,100 fizz damage, reduce the damage they deal to you by 35%. So when you're in bear form, generally if you convoke in bear form, you're looking to try to get that Pulverize. And to that effect, Celestial Spirits is going to help your chances of getting that. However, instead of casting 16 spells from your Bear Druid form, which will, of course, mix in maybe a cat spell here, a healing spell a few times here and there. But for the most part, will be bear abilities. It'll go from 16 down to 12, and then you'll have an increased chance from those 12 to use a Pulverize. But really, what you're looking for, especially in an AoE situation with Convoke the Spirits, and it's good if you combine this on pull with the Karain First Strike. So, like, you'll run into a pack opening with a Moonfire. Generally, you don't want to just like start the pull out with a Convoke the Spirits because it won't fire off a bunch of Iron Furs, right? Um, Although I think there's a chance, yeah, there is a chance it'll use an Iron Fur, but you certainly don't want to rely on RNG to not have yourself be killed when you run into a fortified pack. So generally the thing is Moonfire to proc the first strike, then Barkskin usually on pull, and then you Convoke, and you're critting a whole crud ton with the Convoke the Spirits, right? So that's kind of how that works in an optimal setting. With 12 spells, it's going to allow you to fit more less spells into a smaller window for your first strike. So there's a benefit there. Unfortunately, with 12 spells, it's going to cast fewer, which is going to result in you potentially not getting as many thrashes during the Convoke the Spirits, which is the important spell for you to get in an AoE situation. You want to get those thrashes. It'll increase the the stacks quicker for your thrashes. Also, if you're running the talent Blood Frenzy, it'll give you additional rage during your Convoke the Spirits. The ideal scenario being you have 100 rage every single time Convoke the Spirits ends. And also, important to that end is that it'll give you the shield bonus from your Thrash, from your Legendary or Ursox Fury, remember, right? So the more Thrashes, the better is the point there. My question is, how often are you going to get the Thrashes compared to now if you take this Legendary? Because this is the only Kiss Curse Legendary of the 4 options. And to be honest with you, not a lot of Legendaries in the game are Kiss Curse. They all tend to just have like a very straightforward benefit. That's how you use it, and there's no negative. This one actually does have a negative. So, do the positives of this outweigh the negatives? I think so. I mean, having the cooldown of it reduced by 50% is pretty huge. I mean, it goes down from 2 minutes to 1 minute. That's extremely important. Um, when you're looking at one pack to the next, potentially being able to convoke the spirits on every trash pull in a dungeon or close to every trash pull in a dungeon is really cool. When you get to the higher keys, your chain pulls become more complex. There's a little bit more of a discussion around whether you actually want to use a convoke that often. You certainly don't want to be using it during an incarn burst, so you'll have to plan around that a little bit. But I think overall, it's going to be a benefit to uh, your character if you actually have a 1 minute convoke, um, even if you're losing 25% of the spells, right? Now, if you're looking at all these actual legendaries, though, right now Night Fae is considered the go-to for a Guardian Druid. Venthyr is kind of there along with it. I think that both options are pretty decent. Although I will say it's a little bit more feast or famine when you're playing Venthyr because you're wholly dependent on your incarn phase. Whereas when you have something like Convoke, especially when the cooldown is reduced to 1 minute with the Celestial Spirits Legendary 9.2, you're going to have a little bit more flexibility, pull to pull, um, by being able to use Convoke the Spirits and not having to worry so much about threat. Although that is alleviated to an extent by the fact that um, even if you're not running the Ursox Fury Remembered Lego, you're still going to be getting Berserk for 4 seconds, right? Or Incarn for this matter. And Incarn is going to allow you basically to thrash 3 or 4 times at the beginning of the pull. Now, if you're playing Night Fae and you cast your Barkskin on pull, you're actually not going to want to convoke necessarily, right? Because you're going to want to get those guaranteed thrash crits from first strike when you're playing the Korean Soulbind. So you may convoke after your actual first strike window has closed. And that might actually introduce a situation where Venthyr is actually better because you're not worrying about that on pull aggro, right? You're getting it from the 2-set bonus here. You don't have to worry about first strike. You don't have to worry about opening with convokes. You can just thrash, right? So I think Venthyr is going to close the gap a little bit. I also think that Kyrian is going to close the gap a bit. And it's really cool that you can look at Covenant Legendaries along with the tier sets, and it will actually impact your options, right? It's not something that we necessarily are going to see a ton with Blood Decay. I think Prot Warrior, you're going to have a little bit more of an option with the support builds. But overall, I think it's going to be more about um, the choices that you can have with the Covenants. Thanks for sticking around with me, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end this discussion here. I think there's some really cool selections to be made in 9.2. I look forward to seeing what the balance looks like in the PTR, and look out for my next discussion about this if there's some more changes. I thank you for the support. You guys have a great day. Have a good one.